Hey, welcome to the season one finale of the Best Gay Sex podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Hoppy. Today's episode is about sexual freedom. You know, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, you may have missed it. Authoritarianism is on the rise globally. So, as we cap off season one, I thought it was important to take a moment and appreciate all those freedoms we enjoy: the freedom to express our sexuality, the freedom to find joy in our own bodies, and the freedom to seek out and build connection with others that sustain us. The ability for you and me to wake up tomorrow and prioritize pleasure, both our own pleasure and our partner's pleasure, that is a gift, and it is a gift we ought not take for granted. Perhaps no one understands that better than today's guest, David Wichman. David's the author of the new book, The 4 Rooms, An Inquiry into Sexual Freedom and Well-Being. And in that book, he reminds us that sexuality isn't just a matter of bodies. We have to think about it holistically, also in terms of our hearts and our spirits. He draws on a lifetime of experience as a sex worker, as a survivor, and also as a fierce advocate for queer men's sexual liberation. He reminds us that sexual freedom isn't just a matter of being able to do whatever we want or whoever we want. It's also about making space for all of ourselves, not just the good parts, the joys, the pleasures, the victories, also the messy stuff, the failures, the insecurities, the wounds. He reminds us that even the simplest act of seeking out touch can itself be an act of resistance. So as we close out season one, I couldn't think of a better note to end on. A reminder that queer joy isn't just a luxury, it's a lifeline. Let's listen in. David Wichman, welcome to the Best Gay Sex podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to have you on to talk about all that you do, including your new book, which we will get to in due course. But let's situate people. Tell folks a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, where you became a little sexual human being.
Oh, wow. We just spoke about me talking all the way around the block. I live in Palm Springs right now. I have been here for 13 years. I grew up in San Francisco, and I became a little sexual demon when I was born. So, I don't know any better way to explain it, because I feel like I have been a lifelong sex worker, either through survival, through the type of work that I do, all the way through the type of work that I do today, and doing content and all kinds of stuff. But I have felt like it has either been the foundational part of my life, aside from the many, many years of drug addiction that I lived through. It was still a part of it. So I don't know how better to explain it.
Yeah, little demon. You grew up in the Bay Area, is that right?
I did. I was actually born and raised in Fremont, of all places. So.
Oh my gosh. Were your first experiences then going into the city? Was that like where you run off to?
Early experiences were, although my first experiences were not. It's kind of, I have this funny little story that I often remember for some reason. When I was like in high school, I cruised this guy at a stoplight when I was walking down the street, and he picked me up and took me back to his place.
What?
And yes, he totally did. It was like this guy, he was Middle Eastern, and he was super hot. And we had this very hot sexual time that I was traumatized by a little bit, because I don't know if I had ever been fucked before. And I remember him, and it hurt, and I remember him being, "It's okay, don't worry, it's okay, you want this, blah, blah, blah." I was very young. I mean, I wasn't a baby. I was totally looking for it. But
yeah,
I just often remember that guy, because I just think, because he disappeared into the ethers, and, that moment was over. But yeah, that was maybe that was my first time getting fucked. I don't remember. So.
But you knew you were definitely attracted to boys from a young age. That was not a...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was
I
not
think
lost.
everybody else knew I was attracted to boys at a very young age too, because I was, relentlessly bullied, and my parents even called me a little queer and all kinds of, little horrible things. So, which I talk about in my first book. I don't know that they would refer to me as a little queer, but they would definitely make the references, and anyways, I don't.
Mm,
The recollection is traumatic. I have a lot of trauma in my first book, so it's a heavy duty read.
I can imagine. It sounds like there were some experiences that led you down your path. What 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 were those first early experiences like? I mean, situate us in terms of you're picking this guy up at the stoplight. What year are we talking here? Is this
Oh
the
goodness.
90s?
This is the 80s. Now I'm
This is the
56. I'm
ah.
56, yeah.
Okay, we're going back, baby.
Back.
And was
Even before the phone sex lines. Well, maybe they were there, but I didn't know about them.
it would seem like the AIDS was like the backdrop for that experience. Is
Oh,
that
was it though? I think AIDS was 1981. Now, but I really didn't start seeing it on television and really becoming aware of it until I was uh, like 85, 86.
uh-huh?
Because, Reagan and the media were silent about it for quite a while. And I was sort of I was running away from home and living in foster care and very consumed with my dramatic, 15-year-old life. So it was not like I was watching the daily news. And it wasn't like I was really super aware of what was going on in the world. I was, living
Mm,
in a very shadowy time.
yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
you ran away from home. That because of your sexuality?
No. So I grew up in a very abusive household. I was actually escaped that household and lived in foster care for many years until I was about 17 years old. And then I aged out of foster care. And
Mm,
during those periods of time, um, I actually lived a really cool, fun experience in foster care. So I didn't have a lot
really?
of sexual experiences in foster care, but I do remember um, that I was like out one night, and that is one of I actually had sex at a BART station bathroom with some guy I met on the BART train. I'm in I'm in high school,
Yes.
sophomore year. So those early sort of hookup experiences, those random things would happen periodically.
Uh-huh.
Um, there's actually an exciting story. This girl and two guys, this is very 80s. They were dressed like the Thompson twins. I mean, literally,
Oh
they could have been the
my
Thompson twins,
gosh.
right?
Oh my gosh.
And I was totally into that. And I used to take the BART train from my foster home to the record stores in Berkeley and go through and look for my Stevie Nicks and, all of my divas records that were coming out. And on my way back to my foster home, these three picked me up. And one of the older daddy guys, he was fucking so hot. I was very attracted to him. And he put the moves, they took me back to their place to smoke weed. And he took me into the bedroom and started playing with me. And the other two, the girl and the guy that were with him, the other queer individuals, pounded on the door and demanded that he get out. They put me in the car and drove me back to my foster home. But that stuff happened back then. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't feel like I totally, it was like, this is an adventure.
Growing up like in the Bay Area was, I think some people, like I grew up in North Carolina, so I imagine people who grew up elsewhere must have had all these resources available to them. What was like sex ed like for you growing up there?
Well, what I remember of it, is that it was available. I remember having to take a permission slip home to be able to access it, right? To be able to go, like, your kid is going to be in sexual education and this, but it was all very it's a blur, but the little things that I remember was that it was very clinical and very scientific. And it was very,
Mm-hmm.
these are fallopian tubes and blah, blah, blah. And it was very textbook. And it was like 3 days.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't, and it was junior high school, it was
Yeah.
seventh grade. And it was like, here you are. This is it. You know, and it was right around the time one of my friends found like a dirty magazine somewhere, like a Hustler or something, and there was a naked man with a hairy chest and it, in it, with a woman, and I was like, oh my, all of those, all of that stuff came up for me, and I was like, oh, I really like that. So,
Uh-huh.
but sex education in school was very brief and scientific. It was like taking
Mm-hmm.
a, what did they call them? Assemblies. When you went to assembly, it was like you
Uh-huh.
go to science lab to talk about sex education. It was very bizarro, but that's all I
Yeah.
remember.
Uh-huh. And you're
Yeah.
going out and finding other sources of information, I guess these like magazines and were like porn theaters? Is that a
Well, porn
thing?
theaters were around, which, believe it or not, they used to be on every corner in San Francisco. Now, I didn't venture uh, into San Francisco much as a high schooler. I did a couple of times, and it was one time was really awful because the BART train used to stop running at midnight, and so if you missed
Uh,
it, you're fucked.
yeah.
So, um, yeah, so I ended up spending the night at this guy's apartment, who was really super creepy, but it was a weird experience. But I only started venturing into San Francisco when I ran away from the foster care system. Uh, I had to go AWOL because I was aging out anyway, and I was living with some other people. It's just a complicated story, and it doesn't need to be in your podcast. But I
Uh,
ended up in San Francisco when I was about 18 years old, and that is when, you know, the drugs and the sex and the rock and roll, and I was very much a wannabe hippie. I explored with a lot of psychedelic drugs in my high school years, and San Francisco called to me, and I thought it was because of the free spirit of San Francisco, but also the opportunities for work because I didn't have a job. I was basically homeless.
So it sounds like in San Francisco, this might have been the genesis of your sex work career.
Yes. Yeah, because sex work for me started out as a survival skill. It was something that I found out that I could do in order to, at some points, have a place to live, support my drug addiction, to eat, So I would post ads actually and cruise men in the parks and survive. And that was how sort of I lived for a really long time, in and out of relationships and these other types of experiences. But there was,
Yeah.
it was a very sexual time, believe it or not, even though AIDS was a big deterrent back then,
Hmm.
So
And when you're saying ads, you mean like, are we talking classifieds?
yes, in the back of the paper. Yes.
What would your ad say?
Oh man, I just found it too, like 3 years ago. It said, "Oh, why can't I think of it?" Uh, it didn't say this, but the thing that came out is "young, hung, and dumb," right? But it did not say that, but it said "hot young guy, hot hung guy." I remember because I could only afford the cheap ad. I could only afford the text. Like all these other escorts and sex workers, they got to have the picture with their like torso. This is so dating me, but I actually, believe it or not, the Bay Area Reporter has an archive of all of their papers. And by accident, one day I was looking for something completely different. I was like, let me just check. And sure enough, there it was. And I went by this name. I went by a fake name, John, Jon. And I found my fucking ad. I have a picture of it. I took a screenshot immediately. I was like, oh, this is so wild.
Oh my God.
1990 something. I don't want to know. But it was a trip because back then you had to use a payphone. You had to pay for a pager. And I never had money because I was always on drugs. So my pager would get turned off. It was just it's all such a tragic story, but it was the first foray into survival sex work, and it isn't where I realized, but in hindsight I discovered the work that I do today was sort of found it was so informative into the world that I live in now. Because in the initial years, there was this resistance. It's like, oh, I'm going to sleep with this guy that I don't know. I don't even know and 99.9% of the time, you didn't know who was behind the door that you were knocking on. And you were just, sort of praying to be safe. But then at the same time, you were excited and knew that you were going to get some money. And you knew you were going to have some hot sex and deliver and get on with your life, So survival sex work is a very interesting education on sexual freedom, that's for sure, because it's still happening today, and it still has its place. It's still vital and sacred, in my opinion. It's very important. Especially for marginalized communities of people, trans and other sex workers still do survival sex work, and it sustains them rather than being, without any resources. So it's really important.
Yeah, and I guess you're distinguishing survival sex work from what you do now. How would you describe what you do now?
Well, what I've done for the past 18 years, which is not 17, I guess the first year of my recovery was survival sex work because I didn't really know. I had a few experiences, but one in particular that I had was with a man who called me and did not tell me that he was an amputee. And I walked in and I didn't know. And I assume that he was a diabetic in hindsight, because when I walked in, I'm in early recovery, so I'm still very raw. And he removed his prosthetic leg and set it to the side and looked up at me, and he was just like, "Is this going to be okay for you?" And like, time slowed down. I was frozen in my skin. I didn't understand, what was happening, like I didn't get to pick and choose this moment. But something arrived within me that said, this is important. This man looked really miserable. He looked very hurt. He looked wounded. He looked as if he expected me to walk out. I'm assuming maybe even has had that experience on a number of occasions. And I put on my, like, here comes David smile. And I was like, fuck yeah, that's okay. Let's go. And I hopped on his lap and we started making out and I started playing with him. And when I say time slowed down, it is because the memory that I have of that experience, whether it felt that way in that moment or not, is that it was almost as if the brokenness that I saw in his face and the sort of expecting rejection began to disappear and this sort of light come on. And it was a pivotal moment, not only in my recovery, but in the work that I do in the world today. It was a defining moment. It was, it was almost like an epiphany, or what people in recovery and 12-step love to call a spiritual experience. Because I left there, I won't say changed, but a part of me uncovered, a part of me arrived that said, this is the work that you're going to do in the world that's going to matter. I get really a little emotional about it because it began to really matter to me. It began to become more about what I was learning in 12-step recovery about showing up and being of service and being useful in the world and having a function that says, you can move on through another day without getting loaded. And, I was doing a whole bunch of other stuff. I was walking dogs and things like that. But this work started showing up, and marginalized people began arriving across the thresholds that I stepped into. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I was almost always excited about it. I was like, awesome. I get to be that guy. I get to be this person. And there's a bit of ego involved in that at the same time. But it felt purposeful and meaningful to me. And I hope it always felt meaningful to those that I showed up for, that were maybe untouched for a number of years, maybe isolated, maybe felt in a place of complete despair or invisible. And to a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people that I ended up working with, especially in my early recovery, seemed to be isolated, super overweight, or in some form or another felt completely sexually incapable or unacceptable. And my job was to show up and pretend like none of that existed in the way that I would, without pretending. I would see it, I would acknowledge it, but I wouldn't make it the purpose for my visit. It was, I talk about it in the book a lot, because I don't know how to describe it, what it was or how it works. And I call it this sense of this sort of like energetic alchemy, because I can't describe it any other way. Because I'm still, like, it's one of the most frustrating parts about writing The Four Rooms was like, how do I really describe what happens in the rooms that I walk into? Because for years it was about justifying, about protecting, and I'm this person, and this is why I do what I do, and you can't stop me. And it became something much more deeper than that.
Do you use the word sacred intimate to describe your work?
I do not.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do not. I know a lot of people like to use that word.
Yeah, it sounds so rooted in a tradition that has echoes of that. So what to you distinguishes your work from that term?
I'm a sex worker. And what I do is I provide sexual gratification to people, to men that I work with. And I don't claim to play a part in their healing. I don't claim to play a part in their uncovering of who they are and their discovery of their enoughness, their moments of being wanted, feeling wanted and desirable. Because that's what I provide. I think a lot of sacred intimates also provide that. There's a part of me that has an opinion about sacred intimacy that is not negative or positive. It just feels healer descriptive. It's I'm this healer. I'm here to heal you. And the stuff that I do, I would rather call it more, and many sacred intimates do this now as well. It took a while, but I'd rather witness. I'd rather show up and allow what enters the room to enter the room and to be what it is without attaching this discovery or this magnificent change that arrives. I'm more in the school of that person's already there. They were always there, and you're beginning to uncover that is your work. It's not mine. I just got to be a tool and an instrument and a witness to be present for it. And it, I will cry in a heartbeat talking about it because it's, it's so powerful. It's such from that position of witness and not taking any crediting myself as being some part of their healing process, but just allowing myself to show up as an instrument is very freeing for me in a way, but it also is also for me allows me to really embody that experience for what it is. Because sometimes it's not always this ecstatic revelation. Sometimes it's really difficult. Sometimes it's really dark and shadowy, and sometimes it can go really sideways for people. You start uncovering parts of yourself after you haven't loved yourself for decades, and you haven't given yourself compassion or grace or the ability to be touched by another human being, and all of a sudden all the other stuff arrives, and it's intense.
I guess I just struck because it sounds like you're describing healing.
We have okay. I don't even have an answer for it because I don't have an answer to that.
I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by it. I'm not challenging you. I'm really fascinated to draw out some of these distinctions because
it's a word I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I think because I have this idea around it that I don't want to take ownership of being the healer. And my copy editor on the back of my first book called me a sexual healer, and I didn't see it until the proof came out. And I was like, how dare you call me a sexual healer? You, I am not a healer. Don't you call me a healer.
Fascinating.
Isn't it wild? So that's my stuff. And that's why I don't have a negative or positive or an opinion about being called a sacred intimate. Many people will describe the work I do as sacred intimacy, especially in when I work with somebody who's in their last days or hours of their life and things like that, which is really, that's to me very sacred. I think all the work that we do in the world is sacred and important, especially if it brings meaning to us and to others.
What lessons do you think you've brought to your sex outside of the sex work realm from that you learned in sex work?
For myself?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, wow. That I'm human and that I have this, I can answer it really easily because what I notice, which is really interesting, is that I will have judgment. Like I'll have a judgment about a person's body or another person's profile or what they say in their description or any kind of, you name it, I'll have a judgment about it. And then I'll also have this like immediate instinct to reject. And sometimes I do, and other times I'm like, oh, there you are. You're doing that thing that you hope that others will allow to happen, but live alongside of all of the other assets that they bring into that space. And so I also changed a little bit of my languaging about how I speak about the work that I do and the life that I live, because I'm human, and I get judgy. I get pissy.
Amen. We have to give ourselves grace to fail and to be not perfect because we are not perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah. I try to be, though. God.
I know. I feel
it's
that.
folly and it's hilarious sometimes.
What is sexual freedom?
Sexual freedom to me is really about inviting in all the parts of myself in the sexual ideal that I think I'm working towards or coexisting with, especially the stuff that stops my feelings of being free. My dick isn't big enough, or my body isn't like that guy's body, or, I'm not young enough. And allow that to sit at the table with the fact that I've had a shit ton of sex, that I have a lot of really great experiences. I have the privilege of doing the work that I do, so I'm already playing from an advantage. That my heart is filled with compassion for myself and others. So I feel like that sexual freedom on the spectrum of moving through it, moving toward it. I don't know that sexual freedom exists in a way that we would want it to exist, right? Like for everyone to have equal rights, for everybody to fuck whoever they want to fuck, for everybody to do what they want to do. I would love for that to exist.
It's not an idyllic principle where we have a right for every other person to be attracted to us at all times, right? Like that's not sexual freedom. But there is, I mean, there are questions that I guess I'm interested in, which is like, do you think do we have a right to be desired?
My hope is that you feel that you find that you're desired. I talk about in the book a lot about remaining curious about what you desire and how you desire it. And I like for that adventure to be uncovered in a way that is free of judgment. What does sexual freedom look like to you? What is it for you? In society and in the messages and in our imprints and in the messages that we get from the outside world, you could be the hottest, most idyllic person there is and still feel undesirable. And digging around in that, how do I describe it in the book? I describe it as like an archaeologist digging around in that rubble and looking for those little treasures are the ideas that I try to present that's our journey, right? That's our individual journey. It's wonderful when another person validates us and says, you're desirable in whatever ways that they do that. And it could be 1,000 different ways. And, we idolize people a lot these days, these hot porn stars and the cis white male Adonis has been the captivated ideal for such a long time. And now as we start evolving and moving through other body types and other genres of people's bodies and genders, it's becoming more exciting. It's also becoming more dangerous, and it's also becoming more scary for a lot of people. So in the 4 rooms, you won't find me making declarations. Because it's a book on self-activation and self-discovery and uncovering parts of yourself that are in exile or that are unseen or that are undiscovered as of right now. And so, I don't know that I have an answer for what is sexual freedom as a definition. I just know if I close my eyes and I think about what it means to me right now, it means, a number of things for me personally right now.
Yeah, I get that. I guess I'm just thinking that a lot of people are probably, concerned about the state of our freedoms in the world we live in right now. What can we do to protect and promote sexual freedom?
There's a part of me, what's going on right now is that I said this earlier to you before we started the podcast, is that I feel like this sexual freedom as a form of resistance is almost becoming a catchphrase. And it may be because my book and the algorithm is talking to me like that, but no one's talking about how, just go out and fuck. Just go out to the sex club. Just go out and fuck your boyfriend or hook up. If you keep having queer sex, you'll be free. And I don't know that's available to a lot of people. There are a lot of people doing self-activation work that doesn't call them to those spaces, that doesn't call people to go to the sex club, even though I encourage people to go to the sex club at least once in your life. What I like to talk about in the 4 rooms is about creating connection and creating community and doing what you can and keep creating. And that, to me, I remember when COVID hit and I felt so completely helpless. I felt like, what can I do? And I'm sitting in this studio that I'm in right now and I'm miserable and I'm not doing anything, right? I can't work, can't touch people, can't go out, can't travel, can't do anything. And I couldn't figure it out. After decades of fighting for our sexuality and our LGBTQIA rights and marriage equality and everything, you would think I would immediately know what to do. And I had to be reminded to join the ACLU again, to the Free Speech Coalition, to as I can and as I will and have done, give money to organizations that matter and write letters to my senators, even if I'm from a liberal area. and do things like that and make connections with the people I'm closest to, speak to whatever pod of people is around me, because that's kind of foundational to moving forward. And there are people who feel completely helpless and in fear all the time. And when you're in despair and in fear, the last thing you're thinking of is getting laid. And so if I'm not taking actions to feel on purpose in the world, and I want to talk about this a little bit, then I'm also not allowing myself to be touched. And in my perspective and in the world I live in, if I'm not being touched, even if I'm not self-pleasure, hooking up, fucking with my boyfriend or my fuck buddies, I'm placing myself in a position to become in a very unhealthy state of being. And it perpetuates more despair and loneliness and isolation. And so I always say, create connections, do things you've never done. In the book, I talk a little bit about how difficult it is to really sit down and tell people that you love how much you love them and about how much they mean to you. Like, I literally intentionally stop what you're doing and pick up the phone, or when you run into Joe Schmo and just say, you know what, I just want to take a moment right now. I want to stop everything. And I want to tell you how much I love you and how important you are to me. And I cannot tell you how freeing that is and how difficult and rare it can be sometimes for us to get really caught up in protesting and anxiety and doom scrolling and all of that other stuff, and living in, the room of the thinking mind, which is one of the sections of the book. We're obsessed. And if we're not visiting all 4 rooms, including the room of the body, it is my contention that we are betraying ourselves in a way that can create a sense of not enoughness, less well-being.
Community is the only thing that's going to save us, for me. So I think you have to have community as a foundation. And so building those connections, sexual or not, and they can be sexual. I think people don't appreciate that a sexual community can be strong.
Oh, yes.
And those bonds can really do, collectively a lot. So I appreciate that we have to look inwards to our own community and get that house in order in some ways, and invest in that community to have a foundation to build any state of sexual freedom from. Because if we don't have those bonds, then what will that freedom get us, I guess. But so I definitely appreciate that. I just think it's there's so many bold assertions happening every day about the state of our freedom, how much freedom we have or we don't have, and it's hard to kind of put your finger on it, but it definitely feels like we want to be mindful of, obviously, the political climate we're in, but we also have to have some space outside of that. It's kind of can feel paralyzing, that sort of conflict, I guess.
You probably remember Dan Savage said that quote recently, the next 4 years are going to suck really bad, really bad. And during the AIDS crisis, we danced all day, we protested all day, and we danced all night. And because we needed to build the resiliency, we needed our queer joy in order to have the resiliency to fight and to continue to fight. And I think that is what's really important about that. The catchphrase that I'm talking about, as that your queer sex is a form of protest, is because in order for us to have the community, to sustain the energy, to keep the commitment, to align ourselves with the people that we love and care about and that we want to protect, we definitely need to be able to build that resiliency. And if you are not visiting the room of queer joy, your body, your emotions, your sacredness, you're running on fumes in my personal experience. If you're hiding out in the internet, which I love to do. It's such a drug for me.
Oh, we all do. I mean,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So I always like to end with my favorite segment, which is Sordid Lives or Untold Tales, or SLUT for short. What's the sluttiest thing you ever did?
Oh, goodness. Gosh. It's gonna sound so vanilla.
I love that.
And I still do it all the time.
Yeah.
I go to the sex club, and because most of my work I'm top, and I'm the guy who's doing all the fucking, and I can get very ravenous, and I will go to the sex club and I will take all the daddy dick I can get. And just bring it on. And I do it because it's a part of my self-care. It's a part of my mental, physical well-being, my spiritual condition.
Absolutely.
Take loads.
It's a homeopathic antidepressant. It's all sorts of good for you.
Yes, it is.
Well, I love that. Any particular club you frequent regularly?
Well, when I'm home, I go to 541, which is our new sex club in Palm Springs, which is super, super fun. And it's busy. And it's super busy on Wednesdays at 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon for some reason, because we have people who live here full time, retired. And if you're a daddy lover like me, you'll
Happy hump day.
You'll benefit greatly from going. It's like $10, but I like to go to all of them.
Collect them all. I live for that energy.
Get up.
Well, David, if people want to learn more about you and the work that that you do, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on all the platforms under my name, David_SFXXX. So if you want to see all my salacious content, go there. I'm on, I got the website davidsworld.me, which is to get my books and to find out where I'm at and my events and things like that. And I appear at a lot of sex parties, like fornication and stuff, as a performer still to this day, which I love doing. So, yeah. But I'm very approachable and I'm very reachable.
I love that. Well, thank you for all you do to promote sexual freedom. I'm grateful for that and all your work. That's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've been listening this whole season, I can't express my gratitude more. It has been a joy and a pleasure to bring this information and these conversations to you, the listener. And if you've enjoyed season 1, please take a moment out of your busy day and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. I would be most grateful for some positivity out there. It is really hard to get this content in front of people. There's so much shadow banning, etc. I'm sure you can understand. So thank you for being here, and I would love it if you could help others get here as well. And of course, always, as a reminder, if you are not having your best gay sex, I'm here to help. My services as a sex coach can help you identify and overcome those obstacles that are standing between you and your best sex life. Find out more on my website, thebestgaysex.net. We'll see you next season, and I've got some great stuff cooked up for you. I cannot wait to tell you about season 2, coming fall 2025. See you later.